The West, with its world police complex, and America's obsession with controlling global power, has ironically laid the groundwork for its own opposition. After decades of sanctions, surveillance, imposing particular brand of freedom, and their own version of democracy, human rights, and governance, on other developing nations, the US now faces BRICS, a coalition it inadvertently created through its very arrogance. BRICS isn't just a group, it's a force bred by resentment, resourcefulness, and a desire to break free from the West's iron grip. Perhaps it's poetic justice, the West sowed the seeds, and BRICS is now growing into the storm that threatens to dethrone it. Here's a brief history of how the West, proclaiming itself the world's guardian of peace, has dictated global rules in a self-serving charade of justice that continues to this day. Between 1450 and 1750, Europe saw a series of economic and political transformations that set the stage for its dominance. By the period from 1750 to 1914, European nations and their allies, including the United States and Australia, then a British colony, leveraged its resources and strategic location in the Asia-Pacific to increase British, and later, Australian influence in the region. The Industrial Revolution, which kicked off in Britain in the late 1700s, gave Western powers a massive edge in both technology and military might. With this advantage, Europe didn't just expand, it created sprawling colonial empires, positioning itself as the global economic leader. From China to the Muslim states to Africa, nearly every other region fell into the have-nots category, while the West held the position of the haves. And the West's dominance didn't stop at politics or the economy, it stretched into cultural and artistic influence, reshaping societies worldwide. Then after World War II, two superpowers emerged, the Soviet Union and the United States. Tensions between them created the Cold War, a time of intense rivalry, but no direct fighting between the two. Instead, they used espionage, propaganda, and supported conflicts around the world, called proxy wars, to expand their influence. Europe was split into two sides, the Western Bloc, led by the US, and rebuilt with the Marshall Plan, and the Eastern Bloc, controlled by the USSR, and separated by an Iron Curtain. The nuclear arms race between the US and USSR kept both sides from going to full war, since any conflict could lead to total destruction or mutually assured destruction. And countries that didn't want to pick sides formed the non-aligned movement, trying to stay neutral in this global struggle. Then, we entered the concept of Western benevolence, which expanded during the Cold War, but was truly rooted in the justification for colonialism and imperial expansion. The West presented actions like foreign aid, intervention, or democracy promotion as acts of goodwill or charity. However, these actions often came with strings attached, serving Western interests more than genuinely helping the receiving nations. Then, we saw the era of organizations, starting in the 1940s, right after World War II. We saw the creation and implementation of Western or, let's be honest, mainly US-led intergovernmental organizations that have essentially been shaping, or should I say, governing the global order. Just look at the lineup. We've got the United Nations in 1945, our global peacekeeper, well, failed mostly, followed by NATO in 1949, which was supposed to be just a defensive alliance that keeps expanding and responding to threats everywhere. Then in 1957, we get the European Union, a cozy economic bloc that quickly grew into a central authority on everything, from cucumbers to carbon emissions. By 1961, the OECD was born to promote economic development, or as it often translates, play by our rules, if you want funding. Then in 1989, the FATF arrived, ostensibly to tackle financial crimes, but let's be honest, it's mostly about keeping countries that stray from Western norms in check. Enter the WTO in 1995, where the West basically decides who gets to trade with whom and under what conditions. Next up, the G7, originally the G6 in 1975, the elite club of the world's top economies, where they discuss global stability, that is, how to keep their dominance intact. We can't forget the International Atomic Energy Agency of 1957, ensuring nuclear power stays with the right countries, and the Paris Club, 1956, a quiet group of creditor nations, deciding how to manage global debt, on their terms, of course. From reckless withdrawals, like Afghanistan, to relentless interference across the Middle East, Latin America, and Africa, US actions have only sown instability and resentment. The invasions, regime changes, and military aid to oppressive factions have left shattered economies and fractured societies in their wake. Under the guise of promoting democracy, America has fueled chaos, only deepening divides, for its own agenda. Meanwhile, institutions like NATO push closer to Russia, and the IMF and World Bank trap countries in debt, all while serving Western interests. The G7 maintains an exclusive club that sidelines emerging powers, while the FATF enforces conformity with Western financial rules. This all fits into the US's grand strategy to control global narratives, trade, and security, ensuring the world stays in its pocket. So yes, all these groups have a common theme, mostly Western countries setting the rules, and let's face it, basically acting like the global gods of policy. They're, say, practically final. They're the ones ruling the world stage, decade after decade. Now let's see how America is the reason that BRICS is coming to haunt it. After decades of the US aggressively reshaping the global order, its dominance is finally hitting a wall, often harming developing countries, due to policies that neglect their needs. Now, BRICS is emerging as a challenge to this dominance. The West tends to dismiss the alliance as a political sideshow, not taking it seriously. But is it really just a sideshow, or could BRICS be genuinely reshaping the global order? Or maybe a regime change in the US could actually influence BRICS' grand plans? Let's dive into this topic, and explore whether BRICS is just a background player, or a force that could shake things up for the West. So firstly, the US will always prioritize its self-interest, regardless of regime changes. While both Trump and Biden share this core approach, their methods differ. A change in US leadership could impact BRICS plans. If a new US government takes a different approach to foreign policy, like reducing sanctions or changing trade strategies, it might influence how BRICS nations pursue their goals. A more cooperative US might ease BRICS' drive for an independent global system, while a confrontational US stance could push BRICS countries to unite more strongly against US influence. Now, BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is a powerful economic group that many overlook. Together, they control over a quarter of the world's land, nearly 42% of its population, and around 35% of global GDP, with a combined output of $27 trillion. With the recent inclusion of Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Ethiopia, BRICS is positioned to have a substantial impact on the global economy. It will significantly boost BRICS' influence in global energy markets, controlling around 40% of the world's oil production, and increases its share in global trade and currency reserves. The combined economic strength of BRICS Plus is seen as a potential counterbalance to existing Western-dominated alliances. While the bloc's influence is growing, it still falls short of the G7, which holds 43% of global GDP. Recently, its members have ramped up plans for more internal trade and even discussed a common currency to reduce Western influence. Now, if these countries formed a trade bloc, a kind of trading BRICS, the US could face serious economic challenges. It would lose out on global trade that's been central to its growth, and the economic cost of military actions would lessen for this new bloc. Even if this group just focuses on trade agreements, their collective size and influence could shift the global economy. BRICS has focused on building alternatives to Western-led systems, starting with the New Development Bank, which funds developing economies similarly to the IMF, but with a regional approach. they've proposed undersea cables to link BRICS countries. Despite Brazil's geographic distance, a BRICS games for member nations, and even a new reserve currency. Their goal is to create an independent financial infrastructure. Several other countries have shown interest in joining BRICS. For example, Algeria has formally applied. Additionally, Bahrain, Malaysia, and other nations have expressed interest in becoming part of the group, signaling a shift toward two distinct economic blocs and exploring the creation of new payment networks. But why do these countries want to distance themselves from the rest of the world? BRICS countries want to reduce their reliance on the West to avoid economic sanctions that might be imposed if they pursue controversial goals. And the move also intensified by Russia's exclusion from global payment networks like SWIFT. By forming an economic bloc, they gain shared resources and strength, making them less susceptible to Western pressure. US surveillance, such as NSA data interception, has also pushed these nations to seek more private, secure communication channels, most notably through initiatives like quantum communication tests between Russia and China, which offer highly secure data transmission options. Current problems for achieving full independence. But the BRICS economies, though still powerful, have not seen the explosive growth they once experienced. Russia's economy, impacted by sanctions and its involvement in Ukraine, has stagnated. Brazil has seen economic instability from political crises, while South Africa struggles with low growth rates due to structural issues. China's once rapid economic expansion is also cooling, due to high debt levels, trade tensions, and an aging population. Meanwhile, India faces job shortages and a growing population that complicates investment in BRICS initiatives, given domestic economic needs. Many of these obstacles are tied to both internal economic factors and external Western influence, especially through sanctions and trade dynamics that limit growth. Yet they remain influential due to their resources, manpower, technology, and nuclear capabilities. BRICS appears strong with its combined economic size. And growth has been strong, mainly due to China, but also bolstered by India, more than compensating for turbulence in other economies. But China alone produces more than the rest of BRICS combined, giving it dominant influence. Although BRICS countries have substantial economies, they haven't achieved many of their major goals. For example, despite talk about creating a new BRICS currency to reduce reliance on the US dollar, no concrete steps have been taken. The Chinese renminbi accounts for just 2.7% of global reserves, while all BRICS currencies combined represent only 3.4%. For the BRICS group to have a stronger presence in global reserves, the combined currencies would need a significantly higher share than the current 6.1%. Ideally, they would aim for at least 15 to 20% of global reserves to start challenging the influence of dominant currencies like the US dollar, which currently makes up over 50% of global reserves. A larger share in reserves would not only signify more trust in BRICS currencies, but would also give these countries greater leverage in the global economy, allowing them to influence international trade and financial policies. The real question here is, can the BRICS nations achieve their vision and shield themselves from Western economic sanctions by constructing their own economic bloc? BRICS is undeniably a powerhouse in the making, even if the West tries to hold back their rise for fear of losing its grip. As BRICS emerges as a formidable global force, the US may be watching uneasily, realizing its hold on world order could be slipping. After all, BRICS isn't merely an economic grouping, but a coalition poised to redefine global power dynamics. Ironically, it's America's dominance that has fueled BRICS' resolve. As they edge closer to a shared currency and fortified trade network, they're sending a message that economic sovereignty doesn't require subservience to the almighty dollar. Perhaps BRICS is, in fact, America's own creation, a coalition born of US policies and pressures that may one day take the shape of a NATO-like alliance, coming back to haunt its dominance on the global stage.